trespass of the Capitol and they're pardoned for that crime, that should not extend to other crimes like a murder or a rape that took place that had nothing to do with January 6th.
I would agree with that.
Okay, thank you very much. I yield back to you.
Gentleman yields back. Who seeks recognition? Gentleman from California, and then we'll come to the gentleman from Florida. Gentleman from California is recognized.
Matthew Huddle. I want you to think about the name Matthew Huddle. Just last month, after being pardoned by Donald Trump for his conduct on January 6th, where he had picked up, racked up, was arrested for 4 separate cases after January 6th, this guy tries to pull a gun on a police officer in Indiana. Thank God the officer is alive and defended himself, and Mr. Huddle is not. But what do you think was going through the mind of Mr. Huddle as he was pulled over by a police officer? What do you think he was thinking? He was thinking, I got pardoned. I'm invincible. You can't touch me. The president said that if I commit violence or I'm with people who commit violence, it's okay. So he tried to shoot a cop. That cop almost didn't go home that day because Mr. Huddle was on the streets. So what this amendment is saying is, shouldn't we track the people who were released, 1,500 people, many of them who committed violent acts, many of them who have since been arrested for child pornography. One of them was arrested at the Capitol just a couple days ago. And you know what? If you want to compare to the gentleman from Wisconsin, the Biden pardons to the Trump pardons, I'll put those lists next to each other and see who reoffends. I'll take that bet. I'm going to bet, and I'll bet it all, that you're going to see more of the Trump pardons back in custody because of this sense of invincibility that the president has bestowed upon them. And by the way, the Department of Justice also just said, just this week, that one of the January 6 individuals whose home was searched and explosives and weapons were found, that he can't be charged with those because they're connected essentially as fruit of the poisonous tree of what was done for January 6th. So this is a pardon that goes beyond just what they did on that day. We have allowed the most dangerous people who attacked our Capitol back into our community. By the way, a man who would release 1,500 of the most dangerous people who committed crimes on his behalf will also seek to lock up 1,500 of his most vocal opponents. That's the kind of mindset somebody like that has. But I just want to ask my colleagues, because many of you were with us on the floor on January 6th. I see many of you over there who were. Many of you ran as we were told to leave the floor, and we listened to the instructions of the Capitol Police who were in the chamber, and you heard the on the door outside, and we didn't know what the hell was out there. We saw the chairs stacked up in the press gallery. And we finally were allowed to leave. Some of us had gas masks on. Some of us were carrying the gas mask. I remember Ruben Gallego telling all of us, because we didn't know what the hell to do with the gas mask, how to put it on because he had served in theater. I saw heroic members on your side who had served in theater pushing a desk against the back doors of the chamber. We were all one team that day. We were Team America, and we knew what team the rioters were on. And when we got to that safe location, and in the hours after when we went back to the floor, you thanked the Capitol Police. We thanked the Capitol Police because we knew what they did that day. And now imagine how they feel when they have to stand guard, as they did last week, for a Proud Boys rally that was on the same grounds where those same Proud Boys viciously and violently attacked them. So the very least we could do together as we thank them that day is to tell them, we're going to track the people who were released. We still think you're heroes. We still think that what you did that day is probably the bravest thing you'll ever do in your life and probably one of the bravest acts any of us will ever be a part of and witness to. That's what this amendment seeks to do. I hope we all can pass this amendment. And I hope we can all look the Capitol Police in the eyes when we leave today and go to the floor and know that we still have their back. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Florida is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for the amendment, Ms. Canlonger-Dove, and thank you, Representative Swalwell, for that reminder. But I'm confused, and if you want to answer, either of you want to answer me, I'm confused. We were told it was a perfect day. Was it a perfect day?
Still doesn't feel perfect.
No. But we were also told that they were just getting a tour and got lost while on their tour. We were told that there were no guns there. Right? No guns. Nobody had any guns. The police had guns, but nobody in the crowd had guns. Very minor incidents with police, we were also told. But I like this quote. This is my favorite one that came out from all of that. If you committed violence on that day, you shouldn't be pardoned. And who said that? The current Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I agree that the events of January 6th were an abomination. There were violent acts committed that day. There were people, I myself saw a Capitol Police officer with a serious eye injury being led away as I made my way back to the office. But let's be entirely honest about what happened. It was not an insurrection. It was a riot. It disrupted one of the core constitutional functions of this government, the counting of the electoral vote. But the government wasn't moments away from being overthrown by a lunatic wearing Viking horns. The moment that the last of these yahoos was kicked out of this building, we returned and completed our work. Now, there were some who should have had the book thrown at them for vandalism, for assault, and for disrupting our proceedings. But the vast majority of the crowd hurt nobody, broke nothing, and sincerely thought they were merely peacefully exercising their right to protest. I wish that President Trump had been more discerning when he extended pardons to those who perpetrated actual crimes. But I also wish that President Biden had been more discerning in prosecuting people who merely were there, as President Trump said, to peacefully and respectfully express themselves to their elected representatives. I think the Democrats would have far more credibility on this issue if they had made these distinctions and if they had insisted that those who burned our cities to the ground during the George Floyd riots were treated with the same ferocity as so many were in the January 6th riot. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. I think I got, I'll go to the ranking member. The ranking member is recognized, and we'll go to Mr. Hughes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I thank the gentleman from California for not denying that it was the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, the Three Percenters, the various white supremacist and white nationalist groups that came to storm the Capitol at the behest of Donald Trump, who said, "Be there, we'll be wild." It was not Antifa, despite what some of our colleagues have said. It was not a tourist visit, although if it was, that might explain why American tourists aren't that popular these days. And it was not the FBI. And it was not the FBI. Okay, so I appreciate that. I was a little surprised to hear the word discerning in the same sentence as Donald Trump. You wish that he'd been a little bit more discerning in what he'd said. Yeah, I wish he'd been a little more discerning when he said you got to go and fight like hell, and if you don't, you won't have a country anymore. I wish he'd been a little bit more discerning when he set out a tweet when he knew that the Capitol had been overrun and his own vice president was fleeing with his entourage, when he said Mike Pence did not have the courage to do what needed to be done. I wish he'd been a little more discerning about that. He was pretty discerning the next day when he said, that he denounced what had taken place as an atrocity and that the people would be held responsible. But then he wasn't very discerning when he began to back off of all of that and begin to say these people were heroes and political prisoners like Alexei Navalny and Alexander Solzhenitsyn and Nelson Mandela. And when he said they were hostages, like the people held by Hamas. A hostage is somebody who's been kidnapped and abducted by a terrorist or a criminal group and held for ransom. And he was just a little undiscerning when he described these people who'd had every benefit of American due process and American right to counsel and the right to testify if they want to, when he described them as hostages. What an abomination, as the gentleman says. What an abomination it was indeed. But look, we have the opportunity now to actually deal with one of the major issues that is arising right now because of this nightmare. And it is that there are people who were arrested and prosecuted and convicted for their crimes on January 6th who are now getting off of other crimes because of the pardon that they received from Donald Trump. They are being released from jail, from prosecution, by the Department of Justice for other crimes that they committed that were worse crimes than what they committed on January 6th. I'm going to introduce for the record an article. Department of Justice says Trump's January 6th pardon covers man convicted of possessing hand grenades, classified information. That's in Politico.
Without objection.
February 25th. Well, they went to arrest him for what was the relatively mild crime at the time of just trespassing into the U.S. Capitol and not leaving the Capitol. This is Jeremy Brown. But when they got to his house, what do you know? What do they find? Well, not just hand grenades, but an illegal modified assault weapon, an AR-15, a sawed-off shotgun, and classified reports that he had taken from the Army when he left the Army, okay? So all of those things added up to a 7-year criminal sentence when he was prosecuted for those things. But now the Department of Justice says that he should be immediately released based on President Donald Trump's mass pardon of the people, which included his pardon for trespassing at the Capitol. Now, I would hope that the gentleman from California, the gentleman from Wisconsin would agree with me. That is a matter squarely within the jurisdiction of the Judiciary Committee, whether people should be able to be released by the Department of Justice for offenses completely unrelated to January 6th because they were pardoned for things that happened on January 6th. And what a dangerous principle that is. I mean, will it lead to the creation of a private militia of people who owe their freedom to the President of the United States? These foot soldiers who are willing to do anything for the President and the Department of Justice because they seem to have a clean slate, including for crimes that had nothing to do with January 6th. Is that something we should look into? I think we should. I commend the gentlelady from California for bringing this amendment forward. That is absolutely something we need to examine because there's lots of other offenses that we've determined are out there with these people. Child pornography, domestic violence, other arms charges. Do we really want to give people a get-out-of-jail-free card because they went to work for Donald Trump's orders and invocations on January 6, 2021? I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Question? Well, that's right. Mr. Negus was up. The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
I think the chairman, and I have great respect for my colleague from California, and I suppose if he's willing to indulge me in a colloquy, I just might ask him and give him an opportunity to kind of clarify for me. Is it your position that what happened on January 6th was not an affront to our Constitution?
On the contrary, I think it was a terrible affront. I've called it an abomination. It disrupted one of the most important constitutional functions of our government, and we should not tolerate that. And the people that were responsible for assaulting our officers, the people who were responsible for vandalizing this sacred building, should have the book thrown at them. I've said that all along, and I think it was a mistake for the president not to differentiate between those people and the vast majority of people who, as I said, broke nothing, hurt nobody, and simply thought they were exercising their First Amendment rights.
So given that, why object to a simple amendment that simply seeks to probe, as an oversight matter, the very thing that you purport to disagree with? I mean, your point, right? You've called President Trump's pardon.
Yes, well, that
a mistake.
is, but the pardon
So
is.
I would hope you would support this particular amendment if that were the case.
The pardon is the exclusive prerogative of the executive
I see.
under our Constitution.
I see. Well,
And I do believe in that separation of powers.
I would simply say, Mr. McClintock, again, I have great respect for you, but I don't know how you can make that argument in a straightforward way to make the case that you disagree with these pardons and you believe that they shouldn't have been granted, but you object to a mere investigation or any kind of oversight by this particular
We have no
gentleman
authority to
in regards to
investigate the exclusive prerogative of the executive.
Right, would the
let
gentleman
me, in a moment, Mr. Chairman, but I'm enjoying my colloquy with
Okay.
Mr. McClintock. Would you describe what happened on January 6th, Mr. McClintock, as an attack on our Capitol?
I would describe it as a riot.
As a riot? Okay. I'm going to read to you a tweet, or an X, whatever they call it these days, from January 6th, 2021, at 4 p.m. Quote, "The attack on the Capitol strikes at the most sacred act of our democracy, the peaceful transfer of power. It is an outrage and a threat to our most fundamental principles as a free people." That's from your Twitter account.
Yeah, I don't gainsay a word of it.
On January 6th. Well, you called it a riot. You denied it was an attack a few moments ago. These are your words, or at least whoever posted these from your account 4 years ago, in the throes of that particular day when we were all on the floor, as Mr. Swalwell
I was outraged from
referenced.
it, and I'm still outraged by the people who broke our laws, who were violent, who vandalized our building. But we have to recognize that that was a relatively small group compared with a large number of people who came here simply thinking that they were exercising their right to protest.
Well, let me just distinguish his point, because again, that sounds very different than the way in which many members have characterized January 6th in the past. You're making this distinction with respect to individuals who committed violence or didn't commit violence. I'll read you another statement. "What happened here on January 6th was an affront to our Constitution and national disgrace. Those who entered the Capitol with the intent to disrupt the counting of electoral votes deserve to be denounced by their fellow citizens and prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law."
Exactly.
That's yours. Well, that sounds very different than what you just said, that there were a couple of violent people. But the vast majority, well, hold on, Mr.
those who
McClintock.
broke into
Hold on,
those who broke
Mr.
into the
McClintock.
chambers of the House, those who came here intending to disrupt our proceedings, I have
Time
no
belongs-
sympathy for.
Well,
but I
the
don't
vast
think that
majority-
describes the vast majority of the people
vast
who entered
majority
the
of
Time
building that
belongs to
day.
the gentleman from Colorado.
I thank the chairman. The vast majority of those individuals, again, the broad way in which you framed it in your statement in July of 2022, a year later, that any individual who disrupted the proceedings or attempted to disrupt
Who intended
the
to
electoral,
intended to disrupt them, yes.
the electoral counting procedures ought to be fully prosecuted under the law.
And I still believe that.
Well,
and I believe that
that
the
sounds very
pardons
different.
of those people
Sounds
were
very
a
different than what you're
mistake.
saying today, Mr. McClintock. I yield back. I know my time is up.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Texas is recognized.
Thank you so much. And I am going to join my other colleagues and say simply thank you to the gentleman from California. Because earlier we had a conversation about facts. And the reality is that out of all your colleagues on that side, you are the only one that is courageous enough to actually say these are the facts. Whether you like what happened, hate what happened, agree that it should have happened, the facts are the facts. That's what happened. And so I appreciate you, because I think one of the things that we're getting frustrated about on this side is that there seems to be an attack on facts, so that when people put out fiction, that people will get drawn to that. So I appreciate you for not reimagining what happened as a beautiful day that was just a tour. But I will disagree with you to this extent. When you originally opened, you said that it wasn't an insurrection. And in my mind, I initially was like, it absolutely was an insurrection. And so if I read the definition from Google, it says a violent uprising against an authority or government. Call it what you like, but it fits the definition of an insurrection. And the other thing that I'll disagree with you about is you talked about having issue with the way that Joe Biden prosecuted them. I do want to clarify for the American people, if you are watching right now, that the President of the United States, at least historically how our presidents operated, the DOJ was separate, and you didn't have, attorneys that work for the DOJ saying that they are the president's attorney instead of the people's attorney, but that's where we are now. It wasn't the President of the United States that actually prosecuted anyone. It was his Department of Justice, I will say that. But I decided that I would go in because it seemed like you felt like there was a heavy hand for a lot of people. So literally, I just decided to look this up because I did not know the numbers. We've talked a lot about the fact that there's been 1,500 pardons, but we've never really kind of dug into the numbers. So January 6th of this year, there was an article that was put out that laid out, and this is from PBS, where it talks about kind of where the trials stood. So I'm assuming on January 20th, this number probably is still very much valid. There were 1,020 people that entered pleas of guilty. So regardless of what anybody thinks of the criminal justice system as somebody who did criminal defense, these defendants stood in front of a judge and said, yes, I am entering a plea of guilty. And they have to say voluntarily and freely before they can get through a plea. If a defendant ever says that it's not voluntary or it's not freely, then the judge rejects the plea. So that's number one. So 1,020 of them did that. There were approximately 250 defendants that went to trial, and it resulted in guilty pleas. They either went to a trial by jury or a trial by judge, but they were given an opportunity to decide if they wanted a jury trial or a trial by the court, and they went through their due process in that way. I will tell you that if I go back a little bit further, because I did not have the numbers from this article, if I go back just about 3 more months before this article came out, it said of all these pleas that we've heard of, 255 were for felonies. 255 out of 1,500 does not sound heavy-handed. That means the other people most likely enter pleas for misdemeanors. They only, when the people that still should be behind bars are the people that did what Eric talked about. The people that Enrique, whatever his name is, y'all know his name.
And will the gentlelady yield real quick? Quick question for you.
Okay.
In your experience as a lawyer, someone who defended people, what's a lawyer's obligation if someone says, no, I didn't really do this, I can't plead guilty?
We are not allowed to plea that person out. You can literally have your bar card snatched from you. It is unethical to enter a plea, and a defendant can get out of that plea if they say that they told us that they didn't do it and we told them to plea anyway. Then that could actually be our bar card. But the last thing that I was going to say about Enrique is they let him out. He should still be behind bars, because then he went and he harassed our former officer, Fanone, just the other day, because he feels like he can do whatever he wants to, because he's now going to be lawless like the rest of these 1,500 people. And when we talk about being safe in our communities, this is what we're talking about. We should not be letting criminals just roam the street after they've gone through the process.
Thank
you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate you.
Time of gentlelady has expired. She yields back. The gentleman from, can we
Can I talk on this, Chairman?
Mr. Massey, can you grab some time for us?
I'd like to yield my time to Mr. Fitzgerald.
I thank the gentleman. I mean, that's the point, though, that these individuals did go through the system. And some of them were found guilty, and they were incarcerated. And they spent days, months, years in jail. And then the president had the ability to pardon them. And we're kind of lost in a discussion about back and forth on J6, now January 6th. But that was the point I was trying to make, I guess, at the onset, was President Biden did not do that. And the preemptive pardon, I would love to know what the ranking member thinks about the preemptive pardons, and I believe that he was even granted one, because that is egregious. And quite honestly, we have no idea how that's going to end up. But guaranteed, if Hunter Biden breaks the law again, which probably a pretty good chance it's going to happen at some point, then we'll be able to see what presidential pardons are all about, right? That'll be the real gauge. I yield back.
I yield back.
Mr. Massey, gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Georgia, and then we'll come to Vermont. Gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in strong support of the amendment offered by my colleague, Congresswoman Kamala Dove, which seeks to take the Republicans on the committee out of an embarrassing situation where they have proposed to use this committee's jurisdiction to look into, quote, unprecedented and aggressive law enforcement tactics against political opponents of the Biden-Harris administration, as if there had been any, and she's simply wanting to replace that with something that is important to the American people. I mean, President Trump ran for election promising and pledging to make our communities safer. And what he has done, first minutes in office, to pardon more than 1,500 unrepentant and unrehabilitated criminals back into our communities. He's actually made us less safe. That is something that our committee should be looking into. The fact of the matter is these more than 1,500 unrepentant and unrehabilitated criminals are even more radicalized than they were when they went in. They have committed offenses against the Constitution and against the laws of this country. Then they have seen a man elected who was able to escape accountability himself, and once he gets in position to relieve them of accountability, he does so. And so now they feel like they can do just about anything. Now, Mr. Chairman, I expect that with the State of the Union address coming up next week, there's going to be a lot of invitations extended to a lot of Oath Keepers, 3%ers, and Proud Boys to be in the gallery to cheer on the man who pardoned them, the man who exempted them from accountability for their illegal acts, the man who would say to them that it's okay for you to use violence to accomplish political objectives that I have, and I'm going to pardon you if you do that. I'll pardon you again with my power. I'll be here for 4 years. So it's scary, the kind of situation that has been put upon us by this blanket pardon. 600 of those individuals pardoned were convicted of assaulting Capitol Hill police officers, and now our officers are going to be looking dead in the faces of the perpetrators who exacted such punishment upon them on January 6th 4 years ago. They're going to be facing that. And so the least that we can do as a committee is to use our power and authority in a just way to look at the impact of those pardons, and to perhaps out of that will come some ability to protect ourselves from the danger that has been unleashed on our communities. And Mr.
With the gentleman, oh, sorry.
I'll gladly yield to the gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Just a postscript to your your comments. The founders of the Constitution discussed pardons of insurrectionists as a possibly impeachable offense, because you can see the danger if a president incites people to insurrection and then, it fails, but then they're pardoned for it. You can see how that creates a huge danger for the republic. Insurrection, incidentally, is not some kind of peripheral issue in the Constitution. In half a different places, insurrection, where it's equivalent, is